Richard Wright was born on September 4th, 1908, in Roxy, Mississippi, and died on November 28th, 1960, Paris, France. Richard Wright was a pioneering African-American writer and poet, best known for his works Black Boy and Native Son. He was arguably one of the most influential writers of his time, paving the way for Black writers who followed him. Richard Nathaniel Wright was born in the very racist South. Wright experienced this discrimination firsthand and used that in his future writings. Black individuals had reason to fear for their lives in this time period. Wright was son of Nathan Wright and Ella Wilson. All four of his grandparents were slaves freed during the Civil War. Richard's father left the family when he was 5, and he did not see him for over 20 years. His mother was a school teacher. Wright's childhood was not something he would look fondly upon. His upbringing in the South was a fearful experience. He was shuffled from many different homes in Mississippi and Arkansas. His grandmother was a Seventh-day Adventist who didn't let Richard read books that strayed from the gospel. He was beaten for various infractions. Wright went to school in Jackson, Mississippi, but only managed to make it to 9th grade. Despite this, he was an avid reader and had a way with words. When he was 16, he had a short story published in a Southern African newspaper. After leaving school, Wright worked some odd jobs, but read in his free time. Wright would forge notes to take books out on a white coworker's library card. The more he read, the more he longed to leave the South and said, "I want my life to count for something." In 1927, Wright finally left the South and moved to Chicago, where he worked at a post office and also swept streets. During the Depression, he fell into the bouts of poverty, which led him to join the Communist Party in 1932. He joined the Federal Writers Project in 1937 with dreams of making it as a writer. In 1938, Wright published Uncle Tom's Children, a collection of 4 short stories depicting lynchings of blacks in the South. This was a turning point in his career. He received a $500 prize and a Guggenheim Fellowship. In 1940, he published his most notable work, Native Son. It tells the story of a 20-year-old African-American man named Bigger Thomas. The book brought Wright fame. It was a regular bestseller and the first book by an African-American to be selected for Book of the Month Club. In 1945, Wright published Black Boy, which offered an account of his childhood in the South. It depicts extreme poverty and his accounts of racial violence against Black people. After I had outlived the shocks of childhood, after the habit of reflection had been born in me, I used to mull over the strange absence of real kindness in Negroes. How unstable was our tenderness, how lacking in genuine passion we were, how void of great hope, how timid our joy, how bare our traditions, how hollow our memories, how lacking we were in those intangible sentiments that bind man to man, and how shallow was even our despair. Black Boy, 1945. This quote depicts his thoughts on his childhood after he had experienced it as an adult. Wright paved the way for future Black writers. No one, before Richard Wright, had exposed such emotional power, the oppression faced by Negroes in America. It would not be exaggerated to say that Richard Wright helped to lay the ground for the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. Wright's influence on American literature was profound. Native Son sold 3,100 copies in the first 3 months and was also adapted to motion picture. He helped James Baldwin, Chester Himes, and Gwendolyn Brooks get published. The Man Who Was Almost a Man. Ahead the long rails were glinting, in the moonlight, stretching away, away to somewhere, somewhere where he could be a man. The Man Who Was Almost a Man is a short story by Wright depicting the life of a black plantation worker. Wright helped Baldwin get published, but he turned on Wright. They had many difficult conversations about their differing opinions on protest novels. Wright and his wife moved to Paris to escape discrimination as an interracial couple. He wrote other novels in Paris, including The Outsider and The Long Dream, but didn't have much success. Wright and his wife grew their family, having 2 children, and Wright starred in the film version of Native Son in Argentina. He also wrote poetry, but it was not enough to complete a full book. Wright died of a heart attack on November 28, 1960, in Paris, France. Wright was a model and mentor for many African American writers and paved the way for future writers.